Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. Those of you who are milling about, I encourage you to take your seats, particularly seats in the front, where at every Episcopal gathering there is always plenty of space. It's great to have you all here, both in person and online, for our 2025 Paddock Lectures. My name is Michael DeLashmutt. I'm the Senior Vice President for General Seminary, the Dean of the Chapel of the Good Shepherd, and Professor of Theology here. It is a delight to welcome you, and it's especially a delight to welcome our lecturer, the Reverend Dr. John Thatomanil, who will be sharing with us today and tomorrow. In just a minute, I'm going to invite Dr. Farwell to come up and introduce our lecturer. But beforehand, I want to point in your direction this schedule of events for today and tomorrow, and to encourage you all to participate as much or as little as you are able. Tomorrow morning, or rather after our lecture today, we will have choral evensong in the Chapel of the Good Shepherd at 5:30. It's in celebrating the feast of St. Barnabas, as well as our commemoration of the benefactors. Following the evensong, we have a reception on the lawn. We've been blessed with wonderful seasonal weather today. Tomorrow morning, for those of you who are staying on the close or simply around and would like to join us, we have continental breakfast in the morning at 7:30 in the Matthews Room, otherwise known as the former basketball court, for those of you of a particular vintage of GTS alum. We'll have morning prayer at 8:30. Then the annual alumni meeting is going to be held at 1 o'clock in this room, as well as online tomorrow. And we encourage wide participation for that event. Following the alumni annual meeting will be the second portion of our Paddock Lectures, and at the end of this week of alumni festivities, we conclude with the Alumni Memorial Eucharist at 5:30 and a banquet at 6:30 commemorating our Distinguished Alumni Award recipient. So please do join us as we come back to General and celebrate this amazing institution. And now I'd like to invite my friend and colleague, Dr. James Farwell, to come up and introduce our speaker. James.
Good afternoon, everyone, in person and online. My name is James Farwell. I'm the H. Boone Porter Professor of Liturgics here, duly appointed as Professor of Theology and Liturgy at Virginia Theological Seminary. And, for my sins, also the Acting Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs of General Seminary for another 34 days, but who's counting? However, one of the delights of this work is that it falls to me to introduce to you the Reverend Dr. John Thatomanil, who will deliver our Paddock Lectures for 2025. The names of those who have given these lectures over the years, William Temple, Rowan Williams, and a million in between, have been leading Anglican lights, and our speaker this year very much belongs in their company. Let me get the required credentials out of the way. John Thatomanil is Professor of Theology and World Religions at Union Theological Seminary, our esteemed neighbor in Manhattan Island. He is past president of the North American Paul Tillich Society and the founding and current chair of the American Academy of Religion's Theological Education Committee. He teaches very widely around the church. He is very active online. I could get into the whole thing about karaoke, but I don't think that really belongs in the credentials section, so I'll leave that aside. He blogs on a number of platforms, and he's written editorials for the LA Times and the Washington Post. He is diocesan theologian in the Diocese of British Columbia and priest associate at the Anglican Church of St. John the Divine in Victoria, British Columbia. I could go on with credentials, but I'd prefer to take a turn here and tell you when I first met John Thatomanil. It was 14 years ago. Hard to believe, isn't it, John? And I was privileged to be part of a scholar-teacher cohort funded by the American Academy of Religion and the Luce Foundation to explore the enterprises of comparative theology and theologies of religious plurality. John Thatomanil was the coordinator of that seminar and the leader among a group of experienced scholars representing the major world traditions, who were already working on how and whether theology in one tradition engages with the fact of religious manyness and on the possible significance of other religious thought and practices for our own. From the first time John spoke, I knew I was in the presence of someone who was going to change the field. In fact, the work that John does engages with three fields simultaneously: theories and definitions of religion, which are usually the concern of folks who work in academic, university-based departments of religion, theologies of religions, and constructive theology. The extraordinary fruit of that intersectional work is evident in his latest full monograph, Circling the Elephant, a comparative theology of religious diversity, published by Fortress Press in their series, Comparative Theology, Thinking Across Traditions. This follows his first very fascinating and provocative book, The Immanent Divine, God, Creation, and the Human Predicament, which established the ground of a non-dualist Christian theology by putting into conversation Paul Tillich and the great Advaita Vedantan Shankara. John's scholarship is rigorous and deep and daring, and it very much serves, but I would like to say also stretches, the Episcopal Church's canonical position on interreligious relations, which declares in its section on salvation in Christ and interreligious relations, claiming Jesus as the way grounds our expectation that we shall discover new insights and develop new relationships through interreligious dialogue, in mutual encounters and shared ascetic, devotional, ethical, and prophetic witness. We dare to hope that God will reveal new and enriching glimpses of a reconciled humanity. Now, I said that John's work will stretch this canonical call to interreligious dialogue. For those of you who wonder if the sharp and very modern Western distinctions we make among religious traditions might be misleading, for those who wonder if there is a way to be utterly faithful to one's own faith precisely by sitting at the feet of the religious other, for those who, like me, have found the practices of another religious tradition giving life to the practice of my own, I commend John's books to you and anything else of his that you can get your hands on. John's is an extraordinary, ongoing achievement, helping to transform the way we do not a specialized form of theology, but theology, period, in a way that correlates both to our spiritual growth and to how we live with one another. John's currently at work on a third book, provisionally entitled, you can correct me on this if you've changed your mind, Desiring Truth, Comparative Theology, and the Quest for Interreligious Wisdom. I believe in these Paddock Lectures, we're going to be treated to reflections that will move that work along and to the benefit of our common life. So we're delighted to give John the opportunity to speak to us. And on a very informal note, buckle up. Please join me in a warm welcome of the Reverend Dr. John Thetomenal.
I'm going to have to watch that again to even remotely begin to believe what he said. I'm like, who is that guy? He sounds pretty amazing. Colleagues, Vice President DeLashmutt, the faculties of General and Virginia, I'm sure in the ether, and the respective communities. It is a profound honor and blessing to be with you today. I am not unmindful of the venerable legacy of these distinguished lectures, and I am grateful for the invitation. I'm especially grateful, as Jim noted, because I come to you as a very peculiar kind of hybrid theologian. I am an Anglican priest of relatively recent vintage, deeply committed to Christian Eucharistic life, and, not but, also a theologian committed to learning from Hindu and Buddhist wisdom and practice. My way of being a disciple of the Christ is found in a calling to interreligious wisdom, to practice what I call a hospitality of receiving. After centuries, indeed millennia, of ambiguous Christian missionary giving, a giving that often insisted that Christians have nothing whatsoever to receive from other traditions, an asymmetrical posture that constituted a profound wounding in Christian relations with our neighbors, I seek to find a way of living out Jesus' call to love our neighbors, all our neighbors, in a way marked by mutuality, a mutuality of giving and receiving, thereby seeking to live out a love that aspires to mutual transformation. And that is why I strive to cultivate the vocation of becoming a comparative theologian who is committed to the quest for interreligious wisdom. Now, in these two lectures, I mean to bring interreligious wisdom to bear on an alarming crisis that is even now disfiguring our lives, the post-truth crisis. In this lecture, I will define the term and focus my remarks today on offering a diagnosis and an etiology, to use the medical terms, of the post-truth predicament. What do we mean by post-truth exactly, and how have we come to be here? Tomorrow, I will offer a prognosis and the beginnings of a therapy for the post-truth predicament. As you will soon see, I'm convinced that prevailing public analyses of our post-truth predicament fail miserably to recognize the crisis we face as a spiritual one, and so prescribe hollow remedies that are doomed to fail. The errors that beset even the savviest post-truth analyses are dire and fail to understand what truth is and how we are to arrive at the truth. Let me begin with a remarkable confession of powerlessness from a person of great prominence. I'm tempted to do an impersonation, but I don't really have a good one, so I will try to refrain. If we do not have the capacity, to distinguish what's true from what's false, then by definition, the marketplace of ideas doesn't work. And by our definition, our democracy doesn't work. We are entering into an epistemological crisis. I can have an argument with you about what to do about climate change. I can even accept somebody making an argument that based on what I know about human nature, it's too late to do anything serious about this. I disagree with that, but I accept that it is a coherent argument. I don't know what to say if you simply say this is a hoax that the liberals have cooked up, and that scientists are cooking the books, and that footage of glaciers dropping off the shelves of Antarctica and Greenland are all phony. Where do I start trying to figure out how to do something? That declaration of political ineffectuality is striking because it comes from none other than President Obama, albeit after his terms in office. Participatory democracy, not just pulling the levers at election time, but collective deliberation that aims at the common good, requires sustained conversation. We might and will differ on what course of action to pursue, but before we can work out that disagreement, we have to agree about just what the facts are. But as Obama noted in the same interview, now you have a situation in which large swaths of the country genuinely believe that the Democratic Party is a front for a pedophile ring. We are indeed in a post-truth crisis. By the term epistemological crisis, Obama is pointing out that ours is a situation in which we not only disagree about what to do, we disagree also about the facts. Pockets within our nation states have their own facts. Are vaccines against COVID safe and effective? There is no longer any consensus. Just this week, Robert Kennedy, our vaccine denier-in-chief, fired the entire 17-member advisory committee for immunization practices. These are the panel of scientific experts who advise the CDC on a range of vaccines, including the COVID-19 vaccine. We also know that Americans continue to disagree about who won the 2020 election. As late as November 2023, Newsweek reported that some 40% of Americans believe that the 2020 presidential election, won by President Joe Biden, was rigged or stolen. 40% constitutes an epistemological crisis indeed. Now, let's not proceed, though, by assuming that we all know what epistemological means. In Greek, the term is a compound of logos, study, of episteme, knowing. The term epistemology thus refers to the branch of philosophy that asks about the nature of knowing. What can we know? How do we know what we know? Can human beings have any knowledge at all about the world outside our minds? Philosophers who specialize in epistemology ask and try to answer these and related questions. Obama's use is somewhat less technical. He refers to a cultural situation in which misinformation, disinformation, conspiracism, and alternative facts so flood the information commons that we are no longer able to sort truth from falsehood. Indeed, fears abound that we have entered a distinctive post-truth moment, a moment in which we no longer care to know the truth, but only what feels true. Oxford dictionaries, which made post-truth their international word of the year in 2016, just 2 weeks before the first election of President Trump, defines the term as follows. Please listen with some care. Relating to or denoting circumstances in which objective facts are less influential in shaping public opinion than appeals to emotion and personal belief. Now, dictionary definitions are anything but neutral. They can disclose and obscure in equal measure. The selection of this term as word of the year in 2016 in a political atmosphere rife with manifest falsehood is disclosive. Unfortunately, what the dictionary takes post-truth to be is sorely limited. Take careful note of the contrast that this definition draws between objective facts and appeals to emotion and personal beliefs. The definition does not bother to spell out what it takes to be a self-evident contrast between objective facts and appeals to emotions. The definition assumes that arriving at truth is a matter of seeking those objective facts. Hence, appeals to emotion, appeals to what feels true, can only and necessarily interfere with and impede the quest for truth. Emotion and affect are irrelevant, or worse still, obstacles to truth. Once the terms of the conversation are spelled out in this way, it is impossible to ask whether emotion might actually be an aid to truth. We are not permitted to ask or even imagine a whole host of questions such as these. Is truth-seeking an enterprise that must be devoid of emotions? Can it be? Are all emotions equally problematic? Might it be the case that some emotions, dispositions, and desires are indispensable for the quest for truth? If the quest for truth is an activity, an enterprise requiring labor and effort, would we not require motivation of some kind to take up and persist in truth-seeking activity? What could motivate, drive, and sustain the quest for truth apart from some sort of emotion or desire? Is it possible to pursue truth and invest in the hard work of sorting fact from fiction if we lacked an appetite or desire for truth? Even elementary questions of this sort suggest that truth-seeking might not, after all, be a matter of cold and passionless fact-seeking. Might it be that this very contrast between sober facts and misleading emotion is itself part of the post-truth problem? As you will see in a few moments, I argued that this dichotomy, this bifurcation between fact and feeling, reason and desire, which clearly sits at the very heart of our definition of post-truth, generates far more problems than it purports to solve. But what if post-truth is not as fresh as we take it to be? Have we already forgotten George Orwell and Hannah Arendt, who spoke of the disappearance of truth under fascist conditions? As early as 1942, George Orwell wrote these ominous words, quote, "As far as the mass of the people go, the extraordinary swings of opinion which occur nowadays, the emotions which can be turned on and off like a tap, are the result of newspaper and radio hypnosis," close quote. Writing about fascist propaganda during the Spanish Civil War, Orwell states, quote, "This kind of thing is frightening to me because it often gives me the feeling that the very concept of objective truth is fading out of the world. After all, the chances are that those lies or similar lies will pass into history." Obama's words are an uncanny mirror of Orwell's writing. And here's some more Orwell again. Quote, "I know it is the fashion to say that most of recorded history is lies anyway. I am willing to believe that history is for the most part inaccurate and biased. But what is peculiar to our own age is the abandonment of the idea that history could be truthfully written. In the past, people deliberately lied, or they unconsciously colored what they wrote, or they struggled after the truth, well knowing that they must make many mistakes. But in each case, they believed that the facts existed and were more or less discoverable. And in practice, there was always a considerable body of fact which would have been agreed to by almost everyone. But under fascist pressure, this ability to agree upon what the facts are, Orwell noted, is fast passing away. And here again is more Orwell. Quote, "Nazi theory indeed specifically denies that such a thing as the truth exists. There is, for instance, no such thing as science. There is only German science, Jewish science, etc. The implied objective of this line of thought is a nightmare world in which the leader or some ruling clique controls not only the future, but the past. If the leader says of such and such an event it never happened, well, it never happened. If he says that 2 and 2 are 5, well, then 2 and 2 are 5. This prospect frightens me much more than bombs. And after our experiences of the last few years, that is not a frivolous statement." Close quote. Now, why is there so much Orwell in a lecture that is supposedly about our post-truth moment? And what to make of the fact that Orwell's language so precisely mirrors our own worries? The answer? Our collective incapacity to agree about just what the facts are may strike us as a peculiar feature of our highly mediated postmodern moment, but we are not special, not even in our predicaments. It's a curious kind of inverse historical narcissism to think that our age is facing problems that have never confronted the human experiment before. The problem we wrestle with cannot be contemporary or postmodern if George Orwell had already named it. Note that although Orwell did not have Facebook and Twitter to worry about, media does play a role in his diagnosis. Listen again to that crucial sentence. As far as the mass of people go, the extraordinary swings of opinion which occur nowadays, The emotions, which can be turned on and off like a tap, are the result of newspaper and radio hypnosis. Newspaper and radio hypnosis. Sounds quaint. That's Orwell in 1942. But take care to observe the key role that he ascribes to the emotions. The means of manipulation may be the newspaper, but the precipitating problem lies in the manipulability of our emotional life. We can be made to believe this or that by appealing to our emotions. The addition of Orwell, and I could add, and in the book we'll add Hannah Arendt, who is even more perspicacious than Orwell is. The addition of Orwell and Arendt to our narrative should serve to cement my core contention. The content of post-truth is new. Climate denialism, election denialism, anti-vaxxerism, QAnon, and other forms of conspiracism, but the problem is not new. We confront a perennial problem in a novel configuration. What is genuinely new is the matter of scale. The capacity to disseminate enormous quantities of information and misinformation and disinformation is, in fact, unprecedented. The contemporary post-truth predicament is immensely amplified by new media technologies. And we need not offer an extended analysis here of the further complication of silos. Each of us now conspires in a process of finally tailoring the media sources we are shown on the basis of what we tell social media we want to see. Orwell worried about newspapers and radio, and we rightly worry about social media and more recently AI. The human capacity, though, to discern the true from the false, or rather, let me say it accurately, the human incapacity to discern the true from the false has always been with us. But the capacity of new media to inundate us with falsehoods, that is unprecedented. Now, the work of critical discernment for us will require us to develop the capacity to distinguish between the new problem of scale and the perennial problem of not being able or even interested in telling the difference between the true and the false. Now, a brief aside or interlude. Is post-truth a problem only for the far right? Now, before I turn to the question of causation or etiology, we must confront a misinformation I might have generated by my remarks thus far, that the post-truth predicament afflicts only them, not us. That post-truth is a problem only for those on the political right, but not for those who occupy the middle or the left. The examples offered thus far, right? Election denial, vaccine denial, fascist distortions of the truth, and conspiracisms of various sort, those sound like them problems, assuming some things about this audience. But what if post-truth is a deeper problem than even these manifestations? What if post-truth is marked not just by adherence to what is untrue, but might and should well include entire modes of living that are out of accord with the way things really are? Consider, for example, the fact that almost all of us live within a form of neoliberal capitalism premised on the proposition of infinite growth on a finite planet. Not a single person in this room can claim to be exempt from modes of life that are driven by an economic system, the health of which is assessed by its degree of growth. If an advanced industrial economy is not growing, or post-industrial economy, is not growing at least by 2 to 3% a year, that economy is considered to be sputtering and lackluster. But it is impossible, and so utterly untrue, to insist that any economy, let alone the global economy, can grow by such rates on a planet with finite resources. To pretend otherwise and wed ourselves to modes of production and consumption premised on such growth is to live in the grip of a pervasive falsehood. What a shameless contradiction, then, to insist that the flat earther, who affirms our numbers are growing all over the globe, you caught the joke, right? We insist that that person is untethered from reality, but we give the infinite earther a pass. After all, we who live as though we dwell on an infinite earth, an earth with infinite resources, are as every bit untethered from reality as the flat earther. This is but one example of many that we might generate together that suggests that the post-truth condition ought not to be limited to the truth of propositions to which we give credence, but to modes of living that we embrace. Any conception of post-truth that suggests that only those others on the right count as post-truthers will prove to be facile, shallow, and superficial. Now, this next section is entitled Jesus and Post-Truth. As for the perennial problem and its roots, lest we think it's only in the 20th century that people have lost the capacity to tell the true from the false, let's listen to the words of Jesus himself. Recall that when he is asked by his disciples why he speaks in parables, Matthew's Jesus responds, "The reason I speak to them in parables is that seeing they do not perceive, and hearing they do not listen, nor do they understand. With them indeed is fulfilled the prophecy of Isaiah that says, 'You will indeed listen, but never understand. And you will indeed look, but never perceive. For this people's heart has grown dull, and their ears are hard of hearing, and they have shut their eyes, so they might not look with their eyes, and hear with their ears, and understand with their heart, and turn, and I would heal them.'" Is this not a rather exact and exacting description of the post-truth problem? Listening but not understanding, looking but not perceiving. Can there be a keener way of describing the 40% of the American population who still believe that Trump won the 2020 election, when the facts of the matter are readily available? Or what are we to say about ourselves, we infinite earthers, we who believe, we who live in the midst of ecocidal economic structures, but try not to think about the fact that we participate in our own doom? I contend that Jesus has already, in the first century, diagnosed and even offered an etiology for the post-truth problem. I know I traffic in anachronism, but I think you'll forgive me, or at least I hope you do. The post-truth problem cannot be new if Jesus already has it in view. People seeing, but not perceiving. And if you think Jesus already recognized that there are many who seem incapable of seeing what is right before them, remember that Jesus is quoting Isaiah. These words from Jesus and Isaiah give us very good reason to maintain that the incapacity to see what is true, even self-evidently true, cannot be novel. And if the problem is not novel, its causes and cures cannot be novel either. Hence, as we turn to the question of trying to understand the root causes and cures for the post-truth problem, we ought to be suspicious of any analysis of our predicament that suggests that something wholly new is at work here, or that new culprits are responsible. Now, in the remainder of my remarks this afternoon, I want to turn to the work of etiology. The Oxford Languages Dictionary offers the following definition: the cause, set of causes, or manner of causation of a disease or condition. To ask about etiology is to ask about how we have entered into the post-truth predicament. It's to ask about causation. I want to begin by insisting that there is tremendous danger in getting our etiology wrong. Offer an inaccurate etiology, and we might well exacerbate the post-truth problem rather than resolve it. Doctors can rightly diagnose a disease. You have a lung infection, but misidentify the particular pathogen and so prescribe a treatment that further harms you. Prescribe the wrong antibiotic, and things can go from bad to worse. So, right diagnosis is a necessary but only partial first step. There is no way to offer an accurate prognosis or cure without understanding the etiology for the disease. Now, a whole assembly of solutions have been proposed to combat our current condition by those among us who choose to live in the reality-based community, if you recall that phrase. These are the standard prescriptions: greater attention to information literacy, a call for a return to common sense, a greater emphasis on critical reasoning skills, teaching the scientific process and not just scientific conclusions, numeracy, data literacy, and legislation that restrains social media giants from spreading misinformation. We may summarize these many disparate efforts in a single theme that is repeatedly sounded. We must return to Enlightenment values. Those who sound this theme are convinced that we are in the post-truth predicament because we have fallen away from the Enlightenment's commitment to sober reason. Instead of a commitment to reason, we have fallen prey to emotion-laden flights of fancy, or we have denied the truth is anything other than a configuration of power. On this account, the post-truth problem is the fault of Derrida-loving and Foucault-loving university professors, and presumably some of us seminary professors too. I confess to be Derrida and Foucault-loving. So perhaps I'm the problem. Now perhaps you can see why I referred to Jesus and Isaiah. If it's possible that our Lord was already onto the post-truth problem, perhaps we cannot blame poor Jacques or Michel for our undoing. Just a guess. Well, I do not doubt that it is important to cultivate social media literacy, scientific literacy, information literacy, data literacy, and so forth. None go to the root of the problem. Why? Well, my proposed etiology is so simple as to seem simplistic and embarrassingly so. This is when I worry that those who invited me might regret doing so, because what I'm saying strikes me as so obvious and simple that it's like, we invited this guy to tell us this? I hold that the problem of post-truth is a problem of desire. We do not know the truth because we do not want to know it. I told you, it was obvious. When I think about the challenges of post-truth, I'm routinely drawn back to my favorite courtroom scene from any movie, namely the scene from the cross-examination scene in A Few Good Men. I know it's a dated reference, but in this particular audience, I think most of you have seen it. In the movie, you will recall that Tom Cruise plays a wet behind-the-ears Navy JAG, Lieutenant Daniel Caffey, who is faced with the task of cross-examining the very senior, highly decorated, and fearsomely intimidating Colonel Nathan Jessup played by none other than Jack Nicholson. In cross-examination, Cruz's character repeatedly demands the truth from Jack Nicholson, to which Nicholson memorably responds, "You can't handle the truth." It's pretty good, isn't it? That's what I've been working on it. That courtroom encounter, that charged encounter, intimates something that routinely passes unrecognized. Truth can be painful. Truth can call our pre-existent values and commitments into question. Truth can overturn our deepest antecedent convictions. Truth can be powerfully disruptive. My further claim is that we can't handle the truth because we don't want it. The core problem with our present inability to secure agreement about what is true is not at heart a problem of the mind narrowly construed, and hence a problem of epistemology as usually understood. Rather, the problem just is the heart. Remember Jesus' line about the dull, their hearts have grown dull. Or even more accurately stated, the problem is the bifurcation of mind from heart. A bifurcation that we take for granted and counts for us as common sense. The notion that knowing is a work of the mind and desiring a work of the heart splits the two from each other and sets them at odds. And that bifurcation itself is rooted in another dichotomy we take for granted. Desire and the longings of the heart are affairs of the body, knowing the work of the mind. Hence, we proceed as though knowing is an independent affair which has little to do with affairs of the heart. On the contrary, I hold that to know the truth, we must tutor the heart and not merely inform the mind. Again, even this bifurcation is a mistake, but let's begin with the conventional dichotomy. On these terms, I would argue, mind unanchored in a cultivated heart is easily carried off by the winds of popular opinion and buffeted about by gales of conspiracism. Overwhelmed by information overload, much of it unreliable, we have at our fingertips an unimaginable ocean of data but have lost access to reality. The heart, adrift, is easily hijacked by those who can manipulate attention by stoking our fears or appealing to our cravings. Corrode the heart and you capture the mind. Lacking the wisdom that comes with a cultivated heart, we drift worldless, without bearings, longing for orientation and belonging all too readily supplied by advertisers, hucksters, conmen, and perhaps worst of all, free market economists. You can see who I think the culprits really are. The goods they offer are flashy and the upfront expense is cheap, but the long-term cost of misinformation, conspiracism, anti-maskerism, anti-vaxxerism, and climate change denial is species demise. Wisdom cries aloud, but few are prepared to heed her voice because few desire her. If the post-truth problem is a problem of desire, my karaoke impulses are getting the best of me, and I'm thinking about you too. Desire. I'll leave my karaoke to just that today. If the post-truth problem is a problem of desire, then it will not do to treat a problem of distorted desire with the remedy of information. Battering persons with information is an inadequate solution. Put simply, if the desire to know the truth is overwhelmed by other desires, such as the desire to belong to an elect group that possesses occult information unavailable to the mainstream media, then what counts as true, what is recognized to be true will be what accords with that particular desire. The recognition that there is an intimate connection then between knowing and desiring, truth and feeling, unfortunately, is only beginning to dawn in scholarly circles. The university, for all our talk about being postmodern, remains still hidebound to a reductive opposition between knowing and desiring. Cultural and scholarly winds are only now beginning to shift as respectful attention to the emotions as ways of knowing gains ground. But discourses of objectivity still stoutly retain their hold, just as much on academic opinion as it does on popular imagination. In conventional secular modern discourses, a suspicion of desire is taken to be essential to objectivity. To know the truth, one must arrest subjective bias rooted in desiring. Jesus' call to an understanding with the heart sounds like an antique confusion. The heart? What does that have to do with knowing? The heart, cardia in New Testament Greek, though, might lie at the root of the problem that remains unthought. We might need, therefore, an epistemology of the heart, not merely of the mind narrowly construed. Hence, the following possibility escapes us: that desire might be an indispensable and even inseparable companion to truth-seeking. Misguided desire in the form of confirmation bias, of believing what we want to believe, that is quite rightly recognized by post-truth analysts as a problem. But then the proposed solutions they offer say nothing about what might be done to transform or tutor desire. Right? They keep prescribing information solutions to a desire problem. Now, why does that keep happening? Because our conceptions about the nature of education remain resolutely targeted at training the mind, narrowly construed. The work of education still remains limited to critical thinking, not critical feeling. Within dominant educational frameworks, distorted desire is left untreated. There's not even an imagination that it could be treated. There's no sense that desire might be transformed, or to use the language of Christian mystical tradition, that desire itself might undergo a purgation. On the contrary, regnant approaches proceed as though distorted desire can be overcome by a repeated insistence on the facts alone. It's as though we're all some kind of old-timey gumshoe who keeps repeating to the general public, "Just the facts, ma'am." How did we come to see reason and desire not only as independent from each other, but as even opposed? How did we come to believe that we can know the truth apart from a desire to know the truth? From whence does this sense of opposition emerge in the West? My own understanding of why we are where we are derives much from the work of the late Foucault, whom I regard as an ally rather than as an arch enemy of the truth, as he is often depicted by fans of the Enlightenment. I suggest we need to return to Foucault's late work and the genealogy he offers to understand why we are in the post-truth predicament. Now, I'm going to have to quote some Foucault at some length, but this is good stuff, you'll see. We can say that we enter the modern age, I mean the history of truth enters its modern period, when it is assumed that what gives access to the truth, the condition for the subject's access to the truth, is knowledge, connaissance, and knowledge alone. It seems to me that what I have called the Cartesian moment takes on its position and meaning at this point. Listen, I think the modern age of the history of truth begins when knowledge itself and knowledge alone gives access to the truth. That is to say, it is when the philosopher or the scientist or simply someone who seeks the truth can recognize the truth and have access to it in himself and solely through the activity of knowing, without anything else being demanded of him, and without him having to change or alter his being as a subject. Wow. Foucault holds that the modern moment in the history of truth arrives when moderns come to believe that we can just know the truth by opening our eyes. Follow the right scientific procedures, and truth can be known. Nothing is at stake in and for the knower, the subject who knows, who is in the business of knowing. Truth is neutral with respect to the disposition, desire, or subjectivity of the one who knows. Proper procedure alone suffices. The heart is irrelevant. Prior to this modern moment, Foucault holds the truth in the whole history of the West. The truth could not be known apart from undertaking some spiritual discipline. Yes, Foucault, the late Foucault, talking about spirituality. Give a listen. Quote, "We will call philosophy that form of thought that asks what is it that enables the subject to have access to the truth, and which attempts to determine the conditions and limits of the subject's access to the truth. If we call this philosophy, then I think we would call spirituality," listen to this list, "the search, practice, and experience through which the subject carries out the necessary transformations on himself in order to have access to the truth. We will call spirituality then," this is juicy, nerd juicy. "We will call spirituality then the set of these researches, practices, and experiences which may be purifications, ascetic exercises, renunciations, conversions of looking, modifications of existence, etc., which are not for knowledge, but for the subject, for the subject's very being, the price to be paid for access to the truth." Wow. The price to be paid for access to the truth. Foucault is suggesting that the modern age, the Enlightenment, is the first age in the history of thought that ever entertained the notion that you could know the truth without paying a price. I think he's right. And he calls that the Cartesian moment, though he takes care not to blame everything on Descartes, as is often quite the vogue. He draws inspiration from the work of his friend Pierre Hadot on philosophy as a way of life. As the very word philosophia makes clear, classically speaking, there can be no bifurcation between desire, phileia, and wisdom, sophia. Wisdom is granted only to those who desire her. The philosophical way of life requires and presupposes some account of spirituality. The work of spirituality entails redirecting and transforming the desiring self. If no transformation, then no truth. Period. One more long quotation from Foucault as we come to the conclusion of this lecture. And this too is juicy. I think I'm among nerds, so I think you'll find it juicy. Quote, "Very roughly, we can say that this conversion may take place in the form of a movement that removes the subject from his current status and condition, either an ascending movement of the subject himself, or else a movement by which the truth comes to him and enlightens him. Let us call this movement, in either of its directions, the movement of eros. Another major form through which the subject can and must transform himself in order to have access to the truth is a kind of work. This is a work of the self on the self, an elaboration of the self by the self, a progressive transformation of the self by the self, for which one takes responsibility in a long labor of ascesis. Eros and ascesis are, I think, the two major forms in Western spirituality for conceptualizing the modalities by which the subject must be transformed, in order finally to become capable of truth. This is the second characteristic of spirituality. It's just astonishing how perceptive he is. Foucault's analysis then of the modern moment is nothing short of revelatory. He insists that it is only in this Cartesian moment and its subsequent unfoldings that we have come to believe that truth can be had without paying a price, without a radical transformation of the desiring subject. Knowledge then becomes a matter of proper procedure alone, of clear and distinct ideas. Epistemology is severed from having any truck with the travails of desiring. Knowing and desiring are no longer in relationship. They are either indifferent to each other or they are taken to be in outright opposition. If desire is indifferent to the work of knowing, it can be ignored or simply bypassed. If, on the other hand, desiring is figured as an opponent of knowledge, it must be sidelined or opposed. No thought is given to the notion that we might need to tutor, transform, or heal desire. Desire must instead be battered into submission by the sheer force of truth, with truth reduced to mere facts or bits of isolated information. Foucault's account of the birth of the modern paradigm of truth, as opposed to every other regime of truth prior to modernity, can help us to see why virtually every proposed solution to what President Obama has called our epistemological crisis remains procedural and technocratic. Even when perceptive scholars recognize that there is a desire problem at stake, namely that we do not want to know the truth, we want to be confirmed in whatever else that we take ourselves already to know, not a single one suggests that we must work on the transformation or tutoring of desire. Captive to the modern paradigm, we cannot imagine that we might have to set about the work of educating desire. Still less imaginable is a discourse of true desire and false desire. That might hurt some of your brains, right? The desire itself might be truth-bearing or distorted. Such a way of thinking cannot be conceived within a paradigm in which truth can be had by proper procedure alone, and truth is just a matter of isolated facts, a mere semantic property. For moderns, only sentences can be true or false, but neither desires nor modes of life. Hence, no demands are made on the desiring subject. And so, the experts keep insisting that what we need is information literacy or social media regulation. Not a single word is breathed about healing or redirecting desire. And that, of course, is to leave human subjects in the hands of those who do our desiring for us. The masters of the attention economy grow ever more sophisticated in capturing and monetizing desire or mobilizing desire for pernicious political ends. When we fail to attend critically to our own desiring, others do our desiring work for us. We instead surrender our desiring to those who have now acquired sophisticated knowledge of the mechanisms of addiction in order to mobilize desire to a whole assortment of invidious ends. It would appear that our Lord and the prophet Isaiah concur with Foucault, or perhaps I've put that the wrong way around. Indeed, might I presume to suggest that Jesus beats Foucault to the punch by suggesting that the post-truth problem is in truth a cardiological problem, a problem of the heart. This people's heart has grown dull. That understanding, deep understanding, might be a work of the heart, is something that Jesus takes for granted, but moderns cannot comprehend. And if Jesus is right, it follows that there can be no understanding without a transformation of the heart and its desires. Now, in tomorrow's lecture, I will turn to the matter of prognosis and therapy. What are the prospects for curing the heart? Has the etiology I have offered by appeal to Jesus and Foucault only compounded our predicament and rendered it incurable? What wisdom might be available in the spiritual traditions of the world for treating the cardiological problem of distorted desire? And what therapy must we pursue if we are to emerge from the post-truth predicament? Can we even begin to envision a therapy of public desire, one that might transform hearts at scale, rather than just one heart at a time? As the hour grows late and time is short to arrest the irreversible planetary gloom of climate collapse and species extinction, even the end of the human adventure itself. Thank you. And I am delighted that we have, I think, 30 minutes for questions.
We absolutely do.
Yes.
So Mike will have a microphone in hand. So please don't pose your question until he gets to you with the mic, so that we can all hear you and the folks online can hear you. But John, if you're open to it,
I am not a soliloquist. I love questions.
First of all, I think we're all sitting in awe and gratitude for this time and for you. It's just a beautiful arc. Thank you so much. So my question to open us with is this critique that you led us through of the bifurcation between mind and body, reason and emotion. We also know, and you and I have talked about this, is also indebted to traditions of Black feminism, women of color feminism, post-colonial feminism, indigenous feminism's core contributions of those knowledge traditions. So what I would love for you to help us think about is the connection between the epistemic erasure of those traditions in our education system and where you are moving us towards in this intervention, particularly around our relationship to the earth, as well as in our ethical and theological traditions.
Indeed, I could have given this entire lecture by appealing to Audre Lorde rather than Foucault, who has written extensively about the power of eros and the impossibility of discovering anything like truth or embodiment or relationality apart from the healing and animation of eros. So I'm grateful for your question. I just went with somewhat traditional sources, but I think the book will have to include these voices because they have been telling us that university curricula, insofar as they're wedded to this bifurcation between thinking and desiring, feeling and eros and critical reason, that it's obsolete and nonsensical. So I just want to say amen to that proposition, and I think if I give any version of this talk in the future, I will make sure that at least a nod to the voices who are critiquing the modern university and its regimes of knowing are heard. We are not saying things that have never been said. We're saying things that feminists have been saying forever and being ignored for it.
Thank you for your talk. It reminded me actually of another source of support for what you're talking about, which is St. Paul. In Romans, he says, for the wrath of God is revealed against those who by their wickedness suppress the truth. So he sees evil as very much about suppressing truth, which is as good a descriptor of what's going on right now as any.
Indeed, and although I don't cite Paul in tomorrow's lecture, I cite Augustine at some length tomorrow. And of course, he's being very Pauline in the stuff that I'm talking about tomorrow, as you will see. So indirectly, Paul will have an appearance in these lectures.
Thank you. If you heard grunts over here, they were of affirmation.
I'm glad.
There were several times I wanted to say, yes, amen, true, yes, yes. Especially when you first revealed the focus on desire. My work has been centered on young people, both youth and young adults, and desire is something I am hearing from them of an uncertainty of what to do with, a fearfulness about it, but knowing that the head is not sufficient. They're exhausted by the ways in which the head has been attended to and the heart has not. So I don't know if you have any reflections on that in regard to, how we've inculcated the next generation, or even what you're hearing from millennials and Gen Z especially, who have been, outsourced their desire because it wasn't appropriate for them to have any.
I think it's a haunting question, really, especially if what I have said is true, that there's a peculiar paradox. I mean, I haven't fleshed it out in this lecture and might not have time to do it in the next, but we think that desire is the thing that is ownmost in us, and somehow nothing could be more mine than my desire. But the advertising industry would beg to differ. They know that they can install desires in us, right? And they have become very, very sophisticated about producing desires in us that feel like they're mine, but are anything but mine in a kind of purely private sense, right? So if no attention is given to the question of shaping desire, then those desires are so easily hijackable. I don't know if that's a word, but it's real, right? And when it comes to young people, I'm particularly worried about the way in which a certain kind of toxic masculinity is being marketed through the manosphere, as they now call it, where prominent voices of a kind of toxic hypermasculinity are tutoring our young men about what kinds of things are worth desiring. So this is a clear example of what happens when there is no such notion as an education of desire. You see what I mean? Right. Yeah, which is why I think the point earlier about needing to listen to the feminists who, 4 decades ago, started telling us this probably matters, because they were already telling us that an education of desire, beginning with the absolute refusal to demonize it, right? So, I mean, the early work of people like Lord was just telling us, desire is a good thing. Desire is what animates us and drives us towards the true. That there are innate and true desires, intimately connected to the body, mind, spirit. And if those are not cultivated, then we're in trouble. So it's not a matter of demonizing desire, but tutoring it. Yeah.
I'm almost embarrassed with this because I've read Foucault and Derrida and my sister here and other, great wisdom, and my man here quoting Romans. But I'm going to go with something I picked up during the pandemic, Netflix. And I have a son who works in Los Angeles in this industry, and you talked about advertising, marketing, and he works for a company. There's a guy named George Lucas who started it, but it's owned by the mouse now. That's all I can say. But there was a show, and this is what I'm thinking about, and because it was a show called Lucifer. Maybe you've heard of it?
It's a fantastic show.
Okay, I'm glad. Okay, we're all right now. Because what does Lucifer what is the crux of his interrogative technique in solving murders? He looks deep in this person's eye, into their soul, and says, what do you desire?
That's right.
And it breaks them down. And I refuse to think that Hollywood has more theological wisdom than, all the seminaries and people like yourself. But what is it about that individuals who are making money know there's something about, and it is, the avatar is Satan, of course, and in that context it is, of course, because I just read Gilead, Lucifer is called the angel of light, but here it is. What is it about that? I mean, I'm just fascinated with, it's a tutoring of desire in a different way of saying, they're saying, yeah, your desires. And in this case, it cracks open guilt or whatever in a person. But
yeah. I would have to think long and hard about the theological anthropology at work in that complex series. It is fantastic, not least because, of course, Lucifer is not Satan in the narrow sense. He is himself on a spiritual trajectory. And his complicated relationship to God, whom he calls Dad, is just fascinating. You all ought to see that show. It's delicious. Tomorrow I'm going to suggest, of course, this is a bit of a preview tomorrow, that there are innate desires in us that are good, true, and holy. And that among the things that demonizing desire does is disempower us from accessing those innate desires. And even if you have a deep theology of sin and total depravity, you can't erase the first affirmation of faith. Okay, I'm giving you a bit of tomorrow's lecture. That we're created in and by and for God. Right? That our hearts are restless until they find their rest in Thee. So the heart is a homing beacon for the truth. The heart's own most desire in this ontological sense, right? That there's, in your created being, you yearn for the truth. And even that which is false has a capacity to mimic the true and therefore kidnap and hijack you. So, Calvin will say, idolatry itself testifies to your longing for the divine. So, I think we have a real problem in this bifurcation of desiring from knowing. And it just infects so much of the modern moment that we're in a good deal of trouble. Especially because the very best of people in the post-truth literature come so close. Lee McIntyre is among the best. There are a number of Daniel Levitin. There's a little cottage industry of post-truth analysts, and some of them are actually experts and are themselves trained psychologists. And so they will say, oh, confirmation bias. We want to believe what we already believe. But then what do they say about how to treat that? Information. We just keep hitting them square in the eyes with information. So they name the problem rightly or on the verge of it, but cannot imagine tutoring desiring or healing desiring. Instead, they keep doubling down on information as the solution. Does this sound familiar with American political life? Right? I mean, there are agents in American political life that know that if you corrode the heart, you can capture the mind. And there are agents in American political life that keep insisting on informing people and therefore generating political change by informing them. And they keep losing elections again and again and again because a narrow Enlightenment rationalism has only a certain amplitude. It can't actually transform people. And that's why we are facing some of the crisis we are.
I'm hoping that your book and the talk today was recorded and that we will have access to those pieces ASAP, because this is extremely important and I would love to be part of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh.
Thank you also for the wonderful words and comments. Factoid, and let you take it. You mentioned the 1980 election and those who, or rather the 2020 election, and those who 40% believe that the election was tainted or stolen. After 1960, there was a very high percentage until Kennedy's assassination who also believed that the election was stolen. Probably had some good factual evidence with what went on in Chicago. But in 1980, there was an election, presidential election, and General Theological Seminary had its own straw election. There were 3 candidates running for the United States president. One was Ronald Reagan, one was Jimmy Carter, of course, who was the incumbent, and another was Mr. Anderson. And the election vote at General Seminary of staff, students, and faculty was 38, 38, and 2. 38 for President Carter, 38 for Mr. Anderson, and 2 for Ronald Reagan. Now, I had worked in Congress. I'd run congressional campaigns. And when I saw those election results, I said, oh my goodness, the Episcopal Church has one hell of a problem and it doesn't know what's coming to hit it. Invite your reflection.
Yeah. I mean, I would think that seminaries and the church is best positioned to understand the diagnosis and etiology that I've offered. That we have no hope of accessing the truth apart from the tutoring of desire. I mean, that's why languages of formation still matter in seminaries. And they matter particularly in seminaries that for various kinds of reasons still have a certain core component of people who belong to a particular tradition. Tough to do formation down the street at Union, in part because we got Buddhists, Muslims, atheists, agnostics, and Christians. So how do you talk about formation when there are different conceptions of formation at play? But in places like Virginia in general, where there is a conception of formation that can be formed by deep Anglican sources, it would seem that what I said today would seem almost embarrassingly obvious. That formation is a matter of tutoring desire. That's what the whole curriculum is about. It's not just about trying to inform people into the truth, but to transform them into the truth. Now, is it succeeding? I'm not going to go there. Mike Johnson says it's not my area of expertise. So I'm just not going to pass judgment. That said, it's interesting that Foucault has a very robust conception of spirituality without being wedded to any particular spiritual tradition, right? He's deeply informed by a study of antique Christianity. He tutored himself immensely in the work of ancient Christian thought. And before that, with Hadot, on the work of the Hellenistic philosophers, all of whom constituted themselves as schools for therapies of desire. Right? My phrase, therapy of desire, is stolen from Martha Nussbaum, right, who uses the phrase to name that every single Hellenistic school constituted itself as a desire enterprise. We gather together, we study these philosophical texts, but we combine these texts with certain kinds of practices that we do in community in order to form ourselves. So, this is a conception of philosophy that's far, far, far richer than that traffics in contemporary analytic departments. There's a person who works on Hadot who says every semester I begin my Philosophy 101 class and I say, philosophy means the desire for wisdom. But then the words desire and wisdom are never heard from again for the rest of the semester, right? Or the intimate and inseparable connection between desiring and wisdom is never heard from again. So, hopefully the seminary can still resist these bifurcations. But to the extent that a certain kind of contemporary, I'm not, you know me, as many of you, I am not some kind of post-liberal, anti-enlightenment philosopher, but a certain kind of reductive conception of the Enlightenment, not a Humean conception in which desire plays an enormously positive role, right? A certain reductive conception of the Enlightenment and conforming to the terrain set by Enlightenment philosophy when people do Christian theology, that's a problem, right? So to the extent that a certain kind of post-liberal theologian or theologians influenced by folks like Alistair MacIntyre and others are telling us that we have to be formed in the virtues, I think they're onto something. I just don't think they have to be homogenous or particularly formed by a certain kind of masculinist Aristotelianism. There are many senses of formation that are available. But they're onto something insofar as they do say that truth and transformation are inseparable.
Okay, Mike. No, I find it very hopeful, by the way, that, I find it hopeful what you're bringing out from Foucault that could motivate the cultivation of desire outside of our kinds of traditions, because without that, there's really no hope. So there's a language here for working with vast secular publics, as well as our kind of public, where a language of spiritual practice and transformation is much more available. But I just want to say, your analysis really makes me think about how little excuse we have, because it threw me back, way back. Weirdly early in my life, I was exposed to Plato. I mean, I was still a teenager, and it was just a weird thing about where I was. And the Phaedrus, and the
symposium.
Exploration of Eros.
Yeah.
I mean, Plato totally got it. And yet, of course, we, for very good reasons, blame Plato for the emphasis on knowledge, data, information without desire. So that's a bizarre deformation as well, because he works so carefully with and up from other kinds of desire, starting, of course, with sexuality.
Yes.
So it's weird. We have, kind of the major thinker of what we mean by knowledge, at least in our Enlightenment epistemologies, but I think in our scholastic ones and post-Enlightenments as well, and he got it. So anyway, I just look forward to hearing more from you about how to work this question of desire and the need, really, to teach a desiring of desire. Right? It's almost like stirring in young people and other accessible publics, stirring a desire to desire differently, a desire to know one's own desire, a desire to transform the desire. And probably it usually has to start with something sexual. But I'd love to hear your thinking more just about desiring the desire. And also, when we talk about not wanting to we talk about not wanting to get confined in boxes of knowledge, and recognizing, therefore, that there needs to be a transformation by alternative kinds of desire. Somehow, the liberating quality of that needs to come clear.
Yes.
That it's not just that you need to you need to discipline your desires. You need to have better desires. I guess this is more about needing to desire richer, more illuminating desires. And also the other thing I thought you might add something to sometime is on the question, the gospel, right. Know the truth will set you free. So how does that quality of truth as liberation that Jesus taught tie into truth as desired or as desiring? Because that liberation seems like it could be part of what would be an invitation to something, therefore, richer, more satisfying, more fun than just the disciplining of our desires.
Yeah, I'm glad that fun was mentioned. I am emphatic about, and you'll see this in tomorrow's lecture, where I deal with precisely some of these questions, that there are dire distortions in how Hindu and Buddhist traditions in particularly are depicted as anti-desire traditions. It's facile. If anything, they are programs in the intensification of desire. And ascesis is only relevant in pulling us away from the three poisons, raga, dvesha, and moha, craving, hatred, and delusion. So those you have to downgrade, but the remedy for that is not merely a negative project, but an intensification project. Specifically in Mahayana, desiring the liberation of all sentient beings. Good Lord, can there be a more intense desire? And then, of course, the Buddhist tradition insists that desire doesn't seem fictive or impossible because it says that's what you truly are. Because you possess the Buddha nature. That is truth. Now, truth here then takes on, for Christians, flesh, right? Among the things that we have to fix is this sense that truth is only a semantic property, right? For us, truth is, if I assert P and P is the case, then I have uttered a true statement. If I say it's raining, clearly it isn't. So that's the only possible meaning of truth. But how the heck could any Christian fall for that? Right? Because for us, truth is first and foremost a person. Right? Truth takes on flesh and has to be desired. Right? And the question that Pilate asks, what is truth? What is truth, right? I suggest that perhaps he and Thrasymachus are the Western history's first post-truthers, Thrasymachus, who famously, referring to, of course, here Plato, holds that truth is power. Whatever you can get away with. So, and remember the great axiom that you should never forget. You can forget all my lectures, but you should remember Timothy Snyder's little phrase, post-truth is pre-fascism. Post-truth is pre-fascism. So, yeah, much to talk about here. Of course, for those of you who are not in the know, that learned question was posed by none other than one of our greatest living theologians, Catherine Keller. So we have to get used to people saying ridiculous, untrue things about ours, or things that feel untrue but are actually true. So yeah.
John, I'm going to close us with a final question for the day, but I'm also going to suspend the question because I'll raise it, but I look forward to your prognosis in providing some ways to think about it. Of course, as a sacramental and ascetical theologian, I am thrilled with everything you're saying and the diagnosis, and I'm sitting here at several points thinking about Michael Rapose's approach to liturgy as something that over time and through practice teaches us how to attend and what to attend to, which I think can be transmuted through the category of desire as well. So I am obviously all over this, and a little thoughtful about an issue of circularity or a chicken-egg issue. That these practices that various religious traditions provide for us that tutor our desire are tutoring our desire, if premised is too strong a word, we'll say correlated already to certain judgments about what is true about the universe.
Right.
So there's an interesting circularity there that involves a kind of consent to the tutoring of desire is already in advance a commitment to, or a willingness to entertain at least, a certain construal of truth. And I'm wondering if perhaps your working with Hindu, Buddhist sources, Christian sources tomorrow, whatever, may make me happy about all of that, or allay some of my puzzlement over how we factor that into the significance of practice training desire here. So we can suspend that question if you like, but if you want to respond at all at this point.
I'll just say a quick thing. I think the problem is more than chicken egg. Because ultimately, in our tradition, truth and love are utterly interchangeable. God is both truth and love. And Gandhi, whom I'll avert to tomorrow, will say the truth force and love force mean the same thing. So it's not just circularity. Truth is love. Love is truth. Do you see what I mean? It's more intimate than chicken and egg. It's more intimate even than that. I don't know whether that intensifies your question or it does, yeah.
But I'll sit with it and be happy to
hear. Yeah. That was just like a little koan to take your koan even further. Yeah.
And that chicken and egg question was hardly a poultry question to end with. So can we... Sorry. Can we share our thanks for our lecturer tonight?
That was good. Thank you.
And to answer Steve's concern, yes, these lectures are recorded and will be available on the seminary's YouTube page in perpetuity, and we look forward to revisiting those in the future. Please do feel welcome to attend tonight's evensong at 5:30 and enjoy the grounds. Perhaps grab a cup of coffee nearby. We'll be in the chapel at 5:30 with a reception following, and tomorrow's lectures will resume at 3 o'clock. Thank you again, John. Thank you.